India's best known writers in English, but a lot of us know very little about her. Subversions, it's a new book that actually brings together her most important essays. It was put together by two senior academics, Nancy Batty and Dieter Remchneider. Shashi Deshpande, we know she won the Sahitya Academy Award for the novel The Long Silence in 1990, and then she got the Padma Shri in 2009. But she took a bold move. On the 9th October on 2015, she resigned from her position in the Sahitya Academy's General Council and returned her award. In doing so, she joined a broader protest by other writers against the perceived inaction and silence on the murder of M.K. Kalberg. And this was a major move because it showed that not only as a writer, but she was also taking a very, very serious position. Today we are joined by Nancy Batty and Dieter, authors of Subversions, which is a compilation of essays. It gives us a peek into the fascinating dialogue that Shashi has with herself and her readers. So I'm so excited because I'm so excited to learn about her. So my first question, of course, we've all heard the name, we see her everywhere. We think we know her, but I think this book really gives us a very, very good glimpse. So tell us a little bit about Shashi Deshpande for those of us that may not be so familiar.
Okay, so you've already mentioned that Shashi has won major awards, the Padma Shri and the Sahitya Academy Award. And you've mentioned, of course, the controversy over the resignation. I came to Shashi through her novels, not through her nonfiction writing. And so in my view, I would say her novels are finely attuned to the impact of societal change and historical events on the lives of Indian families. All of her writing is deeply philosophical and highly elusive to both Western and Indian texts. While many of her novels, you mentioned That Long Silence and The Binding Vine, for example, have resonated with and inspired many women in India, her writing takes its place in the canon alongside other major writers in India, male and female. And her settings are absolutely fascinating. They're very specific to certain locales in India. And while everything is very clearly set in India and may be somewhat foreign to a non-Indian reader, I think all of her themes are quite universal.
This is one thing I really wanted to delve a little bit into because whenever we hear her name mentioned, and I know it's very controversial in itself, is that she's called an Indian women writer and her writing focuses on that. You are looking at it from an international lens. How did you come across her?
Well, so I first discovered Shashi Deshpande when I read A Matter of Time in 2004. And I was exploring Southern Indian writing, and I was looking for elements of what I thought were the Gothic in some South Indian writing. And I picked up A Matter of Time, and the rest is history. I spent the next 15 years. I was so, to use a bit of slang, I was so blown away by that novel that I continued my reading of Shashi Deshpande. I was surprised I'd never heard of her. As someone who had been looking into other Indian writing, I'd written on Salman Rushdie, Arundhati Roy. I was surprised that I hadn't heard of her, and I really think that she deserves much more international recognition. She's a brilliant writer.
I definitely agree. But in this collection, why did you want to do it? I mean, what made it that you said, you know what, we need to put together these collection of essays?
I didn't know that she had written or talked so much about writing, whether it was writing from India or own writing or writing from abroad. That was totally new to me. I knew her more or less just as a novelist or a short story writer, but not as a person who commented or reflected on so many other issues.
That's fascinating because my first introduction, of course, I've known the name, was actually reading these collection of essays. And I must say it's brilliant. So the essays that you've picked, but I want to understand from you why you wanted to put together, because she's known as a novelist, but you picked together and you wanted to put together this collection of essays.
So this is her second collection of essays. And I think that the impetus for this was, first of all, that I knew that Shashi had published a number of essays in journals, in newspapers, And those are very difficult for people to search, to find them. And so knowing that she had published a previous collection of essays, I did mention to her that I thought it was time that some of her shorter writing be collected again so that it's more accessible to a wider public. So that was the impetus for putting together this collection. Shashi agreed, and the pandemic provided us with the perfect opportunity to kind of put our lives on hold. And I asked Dieter, who is a well-known Indian scholar, to assist me in this, and Shashi was delighted and honored that Dieter agreed to join us in this project. And we just worked together, the three of us. Shashi sent us probably 100 essays, Dieter, I'm thinking. And we helped her select the ones that we thought were the most current, that would be, to a reader now, would be the most relevant. And it took us, I guess, close to a year to do the selection and work together to make sure that they were had sufficient context. Dieter designed the structure of the collection, did a beautiful job of determining which essays had affinities, and we did a 5-part structure for the collection.
Like we say, it deals with life also, because she literally gives us a speck of, and they're so relatable even today, because I was reading them and I said, oh my God, these issues are so relevant now, you can relate to them. But tell us the title of the book, and why did you want to call it Subversions?
Nancy.
If I could go back to the theme for a moment, I would just add that there's the one theme in the book that we have to pay closer attention to language, the language that we use to describe the world and its impact. And Shashi in this book models this idea of paying attention to language in a number of ways. She notices how politicians use language to divide, how writers engage with language, both English and local languages, to explore the way that people make sense of their lives, and how critics use their power to influence and shape our reception of literature. She uses language to help us notice the world in a different way, I think. In terms of the title, we did not select the title. That was a choice left to Shashi and to her editor and publisher. And I think it does capture Shashi's subversive methods of entering into debates with things happening in India. And I don't know if you can show the cover or not, but if you look at the cover of the book, there is some embroidery that is kind of picked apart a little bit. And I would say that that's quite representative or symbolic of the way that Shashi picks at some of these threads that seem to maybe bind people a little bit too tightly to old ideas, and helps us to think about ways to think differently, to move on in a different way and kind of reformulate those patterns. So while we didn't choose that title, we're delighted with the title, and we're delighted with the cover, which I think is highly symbolic.
And I so agree with you, because I will say, after reading the essays, that the importance of words, because that theme keeps coming through. And that is what the impact that it left on me, that we don't sometimes think about the language or the word that we're using. And especially she talks about how the meaning also changes over time. So it was very, very interesting, because that actually came through for somebody who read the book. And that was one of my comments on it. But go ahead, Dieter. Would love to hear your comments on this.
I think she is very much aware, she has all been very much aware to find the right words, not to use cliches, not to write for the sake of selling a book. And that made her very conscious of words, of the language she had to use. Apart from that, of course, English is not her native language. She wrote in another language, in a foreign language, and that made her even more attentive to what words to use, what phrases to use, because the question here is one of mediating something between how her Indian characters feel and speak in another language to outside readers. And for that purpose, she was particularly, I think she was particularly keen to know what language to use, and so that it would fit her characters or what she wanted to say through them.
Wow, fascinating. Now, I know it's always difficult and this is hard to choose, but definitely I had a favorite. Mine was an open letter to Congress. I know I don't want to get into politics, so I will not delve more into that. But was there one that was your favorite?
Can I mention three that are my favorite?
Sure, go ahead.
Try to be brief. So, of course, they're all my favorite, but I do, at the Crossroads, I really, really enjoyed that that essay. It's about the impact of divisive politics on the literary scene in India, giving a very specific example of the Bangalore Literature Festival. And these essays do get very specific. I mean, they do, they're very vivid in their descriptions.
And she talks about that one in the sense of saying that whether should you go, should you not go, and all writers are making these decisions.
Exactly, the dilemmas, right, that writers are faced with. A missed opportunity, which is similar, but it recounts a petty and farcical debate at another literary festival about what determines who can be considered an Indian writer. And then the concluding essay about Pilau, Dieter has mentioned Pilau, who had an enormous influence on Shashi. And to me, that's a loving tribute that demonstrates as much about Shashi's enormous generosity as it does Lal's.
Fantastic. Now, I want to talk about something that does come up because you've also brought it up. You know, we talk, and she talks a lot about an Indian writing in English, and that really caused quite a commotion. And it's a much debated topic, which I don't understand because we're all learning English also. But it's also heatedly discussed the question of women writers and why writers write, and also why do we read. There's so many questions bundled into that, but she talks quite a lot about this in her essays. So can you shed some light about this? Because I'm looking at two academics that are not Indian, and we're discussing a very well-known Indian writer who writes in English.
Starting with Indian writing in English, I think before she started writing or publishing, apart from short stories which appeared already in the 1970s, but the novels since 1980, there were very few Indian women in between Kamala Markandeya or Anita Desai. But with her, I felt a new voice was to be heard and to be listened to. And I think she added a new dimension to Indian writing. I wouldn't say in particular to Indian women writing, but to Indian writing. Of course, her stories, her novels deal with women, but not just with women. It is not just on women, but it is on women and their relationship with their parents, with their husbands, with their children. And in this case, in this way, I felt to focus on the relationship of Indian women within the social context of their country. She really was a new voice compared to Anita Desai, for instance, for whom the single Indian woman mattered very much, like Fire on the Mountain, for instance, or Clear Day of Light. But Shashi moved away from that, or if she didn't move away, but she opened new vista with placing, as I said, Indian women into their social context.
And I think reading A Missed Opportunity, you see that it's a very politicized issue. There's more posturing and politics and ego and maybe access to the market that is the issue rather than anything meaningful. You know, what is being expressed in whatever language should be maybe more important than what language it's expressed in. So I really highly recommend readers read A Missed Opportunity. Nothing will settle the debate, but I think she's very incisive about what's behind some of the impetus for that debate, and it's largely political.
And I really loved, I mean, when I wrote about why writers write, and she said it's about discovering their own thoughts and they're leading the readers that way. So she was also telling us that why does she write, you know? So she's also discovering herself through that process also. So her writing is beautiful. But what, a lot of times she always comes across, and especially when we talk about her, because as you've said, she's written on so many topics, but she always, at least when we hear about her, it's about being a women's writer or writing on women's issues, on women's topic, and challenging patriarchy. And she has been one of on the forefront of raising the voice for women, and she's considered a feminist writer. How do you see her?
So I can take this. I do not agree that Shashi's writing is about women's, bid for independence, or that it's against the patriarchy or any of that. Yes, Shashi is a feminist. I think she would agree that she's a feminist. But to label her a feminist writing, I think flattens what is really very complex literature. She develops male characters to the same extent, largely to the same extent as female characters. And all of her characters are driven not by an ideology, but by very complex and interesting backgrounds. They belong in a milieu that includes gender, it might include caste, it includes family history, and they respond in these novels. They are characters in these novels who respond as a result of that kind of background and history. They're not cookie cutters. I think Shashi has very few female characters who are stand-up feminist characters. They're women living their lives, and they're bumping up against the restrictions that are in place because of the patriarchy, because of particular history. But they're not stridently feminist novels. They're way more complex than that. And I think that some of the critics and reviewers fail to see the complexity of certain male characters in some of her novels and the complexity of their motivation. So I would say that her reputation as a feminist writer has probably narrowed her readership in ways that are I think a shame. I think she needs a wider readership, men, women. I think most people would enjoy these writers. I would throw out there, what if we were to say of Richard Ford? Richard, as people have said about Shashi, Richard Ford, the American author, is a male writer who writes simply what he knows of what it is to be a male writer in a male-dominated world, and then left it at that. That's the end of the criticism. That does not capture who Richard Ford is. And to call Shashi a feminist writer doesn't capture what she is.
Beautifully said, beautifully said. And I'm glad you brought that out, because I mean, her writing is beautiful, and I think she's talking about society more than just feminist writing. But one of the things that she has done is she also has not shied away from being in public and political discourse. What part of politics does it play in her writing also?
I thought of that question quite often. She certainly is not interested in party politics. She's interested in politics as it happens every day all around her. I'll give you just one example. In her last novel, Shadow Play, there is a scene with, I think, a sister of the main character who is raped. And there is a discussion on what is going to happen now after this young woman was raped. How shall we react? Some people recommend inform the police. Others say, no use. What is the use of informing the police? So there is a moment of, let's say, questioning the course of justice in her own country. And of course, there are other examples. We know all about that. And also about what the police is looked at very often by many people. So here is a very political statement, but not in the sense of giving an idea of policy, but of putting an incident into a social and a political context.
No, you're very, very right. I mean, her subject matter is quite broad. So a lot of us have heard about The Long Silence, but we would love to understand what other novels have made a mark on you so that, we can add that to our reading list for 2022.
So That Long Silence is an amazing novel. I came to it quite late, actually, after reading almost everything else by Shashi Deshpande, believe it or not. And my reading of Shashi Deshpande began with A Matter of Time. And that remains, I think, my favorite novel simply because it was my gateway into a beautiful world of fiction. Small Remedies, though, is also a favorite of mine. And I recommend that readers go back and read earlier works, things like The Dark Holds No Terrors, as Dieter mentioned, great novel. Roots and Shadows, really, I think an overlooked novel, brilliant novel. She's written some detective fiction, which is quite interesting, Come Up and Be Dead. But for me, A Matter of Time and Small Remedies are right at the top.
Dieter, and for you?
Well, I should start actually with a short story which made a mark on me, and that was a short story, Intrusion, which is a title story of a first collection of short stories published in the mid-1970s. And I felt that this was a new voice. And let me find out whether this voice can be heard in other places, in other novels or in other writings as well. And the first, of course, was what is it about the horror? Dark Holds No Terror. The Dark Holds No Terror, which was also translated into German, the only one. And from there on, I followed her novels whenever they came out. And the latest one, Shadow Play, for me seems to be the most impressive novel, the most rounded of, the most mature of her works. It's a very complex novel. And at the center of this novel is love. And she talks about love in so many different contexts, especially love between husband and wife. And I found this a very impressive way of tackling this question, how love can continue to be the ruling feeling between a married couple after so many years of marriage.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to speak to you. I think I learned so much, and I am so excited to read some of her novels. So I think that is motivation enough. Thank you.